Hello, HSC 110, Med Terminology and Body Systems. This is Dr. Teresa, and welcome to Chapter 3 on Human Tissues. Let's understand that tissue in a human is built by the joining of cells. So if you recall from last chapter, really everything is founded on physics. That is the principles of energy and energy transmutation from one form to another. And this happens at the cellular level and then within your body as a whole. Physics, or this energetic principle, subatomic particle land, is the foundation then of the chemistry, which has an impact on the biology and physiology of the human. Remember, within the hierarchy, we start at subatomic particles, and we go to atoms, and we go to molecules, and then we have molecules build organelles and cells, and then we have cells that link together that will form tissues, and that's where we're at. Now, the study of tissues is called histology, and we recognize 4 different types of tissue within the human body, and they are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve. Epithelial tissue functions to protect the body, control substances that enter and leave the body, and it may provide sensory information as well as secrete things. In the connective tissue category, its primary role is to give strength, protect organs, and maintain organ shape. Within muscle tissue functions, there are 3 types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal muscle will tend to pull on bones. Cardiac muscle will pump blood, and then smooth muscle will be within the walls of hollow organs like the stomach and the bladder and the vessels. When there is nerve tissue function, or when we're discussing the function of nerve tissue, its primary role is to convey information. And this is done via, yes, electrical signals, but then that inspires the release of certain chemicals. And we find it in the brain and the spine, but also within peripheral nerves throughout the body. So let's get into a little bit more specifically, some more about the different tissue types. And this is going to primarily begin on page 75 in your textbook. So when we talk about epithelial, again, one of its roles is to protect the body. Epithelial tissue can include epithelia and glands. Epithelia are tissues that cover the body and line the cavities within the body. And then glands are things responsible for secreting chemicals either to the outside world or to the internal environment of the body. Now, please note that a gland can be unicellular or it can be multicellular, which then would have epithelia tissue that lines the outside, as well as any cavity or lumen on the inside of a gland. These substances that it secretes will be of varying nature. It depends on where the gland is and what its role is to do. When we talk about the inside and the outside of epithelium, one feature that distinguishes an epithelium from other types of tissue is that it will have an inside and an outside. The outside is what we call the apical surface, or the top, and the inside is the basal surface, or the base. An example of epithelium is the skin, and its apical surface faces the outside world, whereas the basal surface of the skin faces the internal parts of the body. And a role of the skin is that it forms a barrier between the body and the outside world. When we talk about a classification of epithelial tissue, we have to break it down further. And it gets broken down according to the shape of the cells and the number of layers that the cell has. So for example, anything classified as simple epithelia has one layer of cells. Anything classified as stratified is going to have 2 or more layers of cells. Then from that, we incorporate the shape of the cell. Anything that is noted to have squamous shape or squamous epithelial tissue, the cell will be flattened. If it has a cuboidal shape, or it's termed as a cuboidal epithelial tissue, it's going to have more of a square shape with a central nucleus. If the shape of the cell is columnar or if it's rectangular, we will call it columnar epithelial tissue. So for example, simple epithelia has 1 layer. Now in this example, on this slide, we're not talking the shape, but if you look at that slide on this picture, or the picture on this slide, we can see that the appearance of the tissue lining that white space in the center of the slide, they look like it's a row of columns. That would be simple columnar epithelial tissue. The value of having 1 layer is that the rate of diffusion can happen faster. So we would find something like this in the GI tract, where diffusion has to happen rapidly. If we have a stratified epithelial tissues, would be 2 or more layers of cells. We'll find this where chemical and mechanical protection are most needed, i.e. the skin. So within the skin, there are actually also 2 different types of stratified squamous epithelial tissue. It can be keratinized or non-keratinized. Keratinized, stratified squamous epithelial tissue is what you have on your skin, okay? And then you'll have a non-stratified type, which has a different layer or level of protection, and you might find that in your mouth or the vagina or the anus. When we talk transitional epithelial tissue, this is a specialized type of epithelial tissue, primarily found in the bladder. This type is stratified, meaning it's gonna have 2 or more layers on top of one another, but it needs to stretch. So the shape of it is modifiable or mutable. Pseudostratified columnar epithelial is another different kind of epithelial tissue. If you look at the word pseudo, stratified, pseudo should tell you that it's fake or false. Stratified tells us there are multiple layers. Columnar tells us it's a rectangle shaped epithelial tissue or cell. So because it's pseudostratified, it's going to have the appearance of being stratified, but it's only going to be 1 layer. And that will be able to be determined by the varying height and position of the nuclei. And we will find something like this in the trachea and in the reproductive organs. Let me go back here and talk about one more thing about pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue. So actually the types that we might find within the trachea and the reproductive organs, a little bit more specific, it would be pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. The purpose of that being that there are cilia on the end of these cells, and the cilia, if you recall, are little hair-like projections, and they're going to help sweep things. So I think that, you know, it makes sense that it's in the trachea where we want to sweep dirt that gets trapped in the mucus or debris or pathogens or whatever up and out so we can get rid of anything in the way and that stuff doesn't get into the lungs. Again, when we talk about glands, they will produce and secrete substances. Endocrine glands are the ones responsible for secreting things into the tissue's interstitial space. So endocrine, the prefix endo tells us it's on the inside. Okay, so these guys will ooze the chemicals that they produce into the surrounding vasculature to be carried away to a receptor site somewhere within the body. An exocrine gland, they will be responsible for secreting something to a surface or a lumen somewhere. And they will have a duct in order to do this. So a couple different shapes of exocrine glands that are relevant in kind of understanding how they work. If you look at the two different shapes of glands within the exocrine category, we have a tubular shape or an alveolar shape. Now on this picture, you can see that the tubular portion of the gland at the base of the gland, this is where the action's happening. These cells here are responsible for the production and the secretion of its product into the duct. This is the tubular shaped exocrine gland. In the other example, we have what's called an alveolar shaped. Alveoli look like little grape clusters or bubbles. So it's more of a bulb shape. Again, at the base or the bottom of this gland, this is where the activity is happening, where the production and secretion of the product will happen. Now, if we want to add on to that and get a little bit more complex, this would be a simple tubular shape and a simple alveolar shape. Exocrine gland, when they become compound, they have multiple ducts leading into the primary duct. So we have a compound tubular gland. You can see we have multiple tubular glands that will empty their product into this duct. And then we have branching patterns that happen as well. Here is a compound alveolar, each with its own duct that will branch into the primary duct. And then we have a compound tubulo-alveolar, which is a combination of all of it together. Now, when we get to the connective tissue category, this one breaks down into 4 different categories itself. Connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. Please note the bone and blood are classified as connective tissue. So again, validation that your nose bone is connected to your toe bone. Now, you can reference what I'm talking about here a little bit more in detail on page 79 of your textbook. So let's walk through some of the properties of these classifications. So connective tissue in and of itself will include the cells as well as what's called an extracellular matrix, okay, which is made up of fluids and proteins and some other components. Each major class will have different kinds of cells and a different composition to that extracellular matrix. The matrix is what will deliver the strength and or elasticity to the tissue itself. When we're talking the fibers within this matrix that are going to make up the matrix and deliver some really big properties to the connective tissue, the three types of protein fibers that are going to do this are collagen, basically for strength, reticular fibers, and elastic fibers. The reticular fibers, they're thinner and weaker than collagen, but they will help provide a structural framework to hold cells in place. I think we understand that elastic fibers provide an elastic stretchability and return to original form, that property. Connective tissue also delivers strength for tensile strength, compressive strength, and as we mentioned, elasticity. Tensile strength is the ability to withstand a pulling force. The opposite of tension is compression, anything that will squeeze or push. Compressive strength is the ability to withstand compression. And then elasticity, I think we know that, something that will spring back to its original state. So when we're talking about the class in connective tissue, that is connective tissue proper, let's talk about how that further breaks down. That will break into something called areolar or loose connective tissue, reticular tissue, and adipose tissue. So in this picture, you get to see areolar tissue and adipose tissue. Areolar tissue, you can notice it looks like little hairs strewn everywhere. Also, the way that they stain will determine what fiber we're looking at generally. The adipose tissue is all through your body, and it is fat, and it has a weird bubbly appearance to it where the nuclei are kind of smashed to the edge of the cell, and it's really just a giant fat droplet primarily. Let me back that up a second. Areolar connective tissue. We can find that everywhere in the body, but it is typically as a layer beneath epithelial tissue. It has collagen fibers, reticular fibers, and elastic fibers in its matrix, which can hold water. It provides support and strength and elasticity to the overlying epithelia. It also plays a role in inflammation and immune defense because it will contain most of the key cell types involved in the processes. This will be including a cell called a mast cell, macrophages, and lymphocytes. Adipose tissue. This is also located under the skin, called subcutaneous fats, but it's tissue in the abdomen or in the thorax as well. And when it is there, we call it visceral fat. Most adipose tissue has few mitochondria. And there are different kinds of adipose tissue, whether it's like a white fat or a brown fat. When we talk reticular tissue, this is pretty specific. Reticular connective tissue contains mostly reticular protein fibers within the matrix. We find it in lymph nodes, bone marrow, and the spleen. So if you think about that, as we learn more about it, that may make more sense. So this particular type of tissue is going to have a heavy end in immunity. When we get to the category of connective tissue, still under connective tissue proper, it gets broken down into a category called dense connective tissue. We have 3 types under that: regular, irregular, and elastic. The regular elastic tissue, as you can see from this slide, you notice that there are only a few nuclei noticeable on slide. Okay, that would be the dark purple stained areas. And the rest, we're looking at fibers. When we're looking at the elastic dense connective tissue, that is primarily going to be comprised of elastic connective or elastic fibers within this type of connective tissue. So that's what you're primarily seeing in that slide. Dense regular connective tissue consists of collagen fibers that are mostly parallel to one another. It will contain occasional fibroblasts. That's the type of cell within it, and they secrete collagen. Dense regular connective tissue is found in tendons and ligaments, and its abundant collagen fibers give it a high tensile strength. Dense irregular connective tissue, not pictured here, is also comprised primarily of collagen fibers. However, the fibers are not parallel, and in an irregular connective tissue, it's like swirly when we look at it on slide. We find the dense irregular connective tissue in the dermis, which is a deep layer of the skin, and the fibrous capsules around joints. The elastic connective tissue is found in the walls of the airways and the large arteries. The next major category of connective tissue is cartilage. Within the cartilage category, that gets broken down further into 3 types called hyaline, elastic, and fibro. The types of cells that are included within this tissue are chondroblasts and chondrocytes. The extracellular matrix of all cartilages will be secreted by the chondroblasts. They will contain proteoglycan molecules, which blends to mobilize water molecules. The extracellular fibers will primarily be collagen, but there will be some with elastic in it, and we'll see that. Primary feature is to provide support and flexibility, which will minimize friction. So within the cartilage category, we have hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Hyaline cartilage, we're going to see that on the end of long bones, covering the ribs that connect to the sternum. It's also found in the nose, the trachea, and the larynx. Elastic cartilage is similar, but it will contain more elastic fibers, which I think makes sense. It's found in the ear and the epiglottis. And then fibrocartilage has more collagen. This is a stronger type of cartilage, and we're going to find that in the intervertebral discs. The discs of the knee joint and like the pubic symphysis. Now let's talk about bone. That is one of our categories of Connective tissue. Again, yes, bone is considered a connective tissue. It's broken down into two different categories within itself: compact and spongy bone. Compact bone is cortical bone, or the stuff on the outside, and that's what you're seeing in this slide. And then spongy bone is on the inner portion of bones, of long bones. These cells, the primary cells that are involved, are going to be the osteoblasts and osteocytes, each one having a different role. Blasts will build bone. Osteoclasts actually break down bone, and osteocytes are like the in-betweeners and the more mature cells. The extracellular matrix of bone is laid down by the osteoblast. The extracellular fibers that we'll find primarily in bone are collagen. Bone is fascinating material, and it is quite alive and dynamic tissue, not just something rigid that doesn't do anything, and it actually has some flexibility to it that is required. It provides a framework, it protects organs, and it supports the body. The last type of connective tissue is blood, which it's not listed here in this order, but I'm going to mention it here. Okay, yes, blood is also classified as a connective tissue. The cells involved are red blood cells or erythrocytes, white blood cells or leukocytes, and platelets. Its extracellular matrix is the blood plasma. It really doesn't have any extracellular fibers considered. However, it does have plasma proteins within it that could be considered the fibers, and I would consider it that. It's used in transport regulation, protection, oxygen carrying, and then carries nutrients, removes waste. When we get to muscle tissue, we're going to talk about skeletal muscle first. It's the most abundant type. We know that it attaches to and has the purpose of moving bones. It is striated. Okay, so you can look here and look at the stripes, and the stripes are created from protein filaments of actin and myosin. Cardiac muscle also is striated. It can branch though. Cardiac muscle cell can have a branched pattern, and they have an interesting pattern or way that they join to one another with a structure called a gap junction or an intercalated disc. And then the intercalated disc of cardiac muscle cells deliver the entire organ to function as one, and gives it part of the rhythm of the heart. Smooth muscle, again, found in the walls of hollow organs. And I mentioned that you find it like in your stomach, in your bladder, in your vessels. The cytoplasm of smooth muscle appears uniform and smooth when we look at it on a slide. So smooth muscle will not have the striations, will not have the same striped appearance. When we get to nerve tissue, heaviest concentration in the brain and spine, which is what we call the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is anything outside of the spine. Within the nervous system, though, there are two types of cells. There are neurons, which I think we're probably used to thinking about or seeing, and that's primarily what you're seeing on the slide here. But the glial cells, or the supporting cells that help hold this network in place, outnumber the neurons like 50,000 to 1. So there's a big difference in they're hugely important in the functionality of the neurons. As any tissue will develop, it's going to develop into layers. The mesoderm, okay, would be the middle layer. The ectoderm would be at the upper layer. And then you're going to have the endoderm. And hopefully that should deliver us an idea of where exactly inside/outside of the developing tissue that it's going to be. Gastrulation. This is the conversion of the 2-layer embryo into a 3-layer embryo. As it goes through its phases of growth, the embryonic disc is kind of where things start after fertilization. That's going to grow into then the primitive streak. And this is going to happen around 2 weeks of formation of the embryo of the fertilized zygote. The relevance of anything that differentiates, and even in this process, is developmental abnormalities can be investigated if we understand how and when all of this happens. Developmental abnormalities is when a cell does not move to a correct place at the right time. So examples would be spina bifida, which is a birth defect that involves the nervous system. And there's a neural tube defect within that. Part of the neural tube will remain open on the back of the embryo. And there are different kinds of spina bifida, FYI. A cleft lip and a cleft palate. These are birth defects in which the upper lip or jaw or palate do not fully join. The cleft lip and cleft palate can interfere with feeding and swallowing, and in most cases, the clefts in the lip can be corrected surgically. The clefts of the lip and palate are due to a combination of genetic and environmental factors. There's no known way to reduce the risk of it, though. Heart defects are something of concern. The cardiovascular system starts to develop in about the 3rd week of life, and by the 22nd day, the cardiac tube has formed in the midline of the embryo. The cardiac tube therefore undergoes a complicated set of twists and folds to form the 4 chambers of the heart and to continue the rest of the process. When we talk about tissues, okay, as with anything, as we're trying to understand physiology for human health and well-being, we have to look into understanding then not only errors in embryonic development of tissue, but also disease processes. In understanding a disease, it is paramount and relevant to understand the cellular disarray that has gone on. If you go into cellular mechanics, you can figure out just about anything that's gone wrong. You learn the cause and the progression of the disease. You can do this by utilizing symptoms. Okay, so let's talk about this for 1 second. A symptom is something that you're aware of. A sign might be something else someone else can see on you, but a symptom is generally something that you're experiencing. Now, symptoms are the language of the body. So it is relevant to understand, perhaps, the map of symptoms. One thing to also note is that not everyone's symptoms mean the same thing. For example, your headache, the origin of it does not match the origin of my headache. Perhaps mine is dehydration and yours is hormones. Therefore, yes, we can treat the symptom by just shutting down the headache, but that doesn't stop the cause. If you need water, you should drink water. If we need a hormone balancing system protocol, then that should be the methods or the steps taken in order to correct the symptom, if that makes sense. So again, we use symptoms to kind of develop a path to the origin. And then we can determine the effects of treatment that way. One way we can learn about disease is via biopsy. There are other ways, okay, but biopsy does deliver us an idea, pretty specific idea of pathology, of what things look like. I think to start though, because they're invasive, biopsy is invasive. I think blood draws are the first step. And then you can do some other metabolic tests to determine what may be in disarray before you step into some more intense testing. Some epithelial tissues disorders that we can talk about, maybe eczema, okay, also known as atopic dermatitis, one of the most common skin conditions, okay. It lands on the skin, okay, but that's not the origin of it, if that makes sense. It's letting you know that something's not okay on the inside. The skin is great at doing that. Cancer will often originate in epithelial tissue. When we talk about cystic fibrosis, this is one of the most common inherited diseases, usually caused by a gene mutation. And it's a recessive pattern of inheritance. It's more common in boys. We have exocrine glands that become affected by this genetic mutation, and it will result in nutritional deficits, the formation of cysts and scar tissue, and recurrent lung infections. When we talk connective tissue disorder, some things, one syndrome that we can discuss would be Marfan syndrome. This is an inherited connective tissue disease caused by a mutation in the FBN1 gene. It will affect the skeletal system, cardiovascular system, and the eyes. And there's, we say no cure. There's not for most of the genetic disorders as far as cure, making it be, if we're looking for absolution, that's not necessarily what's going to happen here with current treatments, but you can do management of things. The symptoms and severity of Marfan's differ depending on the type of mutation. Symptoms may be present at birth, but they often won't show up till later. With lupus, systemic lupus erythematosus. Okay, this is an autoimmune disease. It affects skin, kidneys, joints, nerve tissue, and blood cells. Severity will vary. It depends. Okay, if it's autoimmune, okay, we understand that that's like a hypersensitivity reaction to our cells. So really, this is a connective tissue disorder, which we already mentioned, but specific to some of these areas where we're going to have breakdown of connective tissue in these areas. Some of the new technology, understand that all of this is new, okay? Even the discovery of a lot of this stuff is just within the last 100 years, just a couple hundred years, Okay, artificial cartilage. We might be able to do that, or maybe like a cartilaginous implant of sorts. We can do skin grafting to replace skin. Here's the thing though, anytime we do this, anytime you put something foreign in the body, we have to be conscious of what the immune system is going to want to do with that. So, okay, let's touch on cancer. Cancer classifications, they're classified by the type of tissue involved or where they originate. Most originate in glandular and epithelial tissues. That is where they begin. Some of them may be classified by location in the body, i.e. lung, breast, prostate, colorectal. When we're classifying cancers, a carcinoma happens in epithelial. Sarcomas are non-epithelial. Histological classifications. Lymphomas are solid tumors and lymph nodes or lymphatic tissue. And a leukemia is a liquid cancer. So let's look at some of our medical terminology for this chapter. Ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. Ectoderm. Ecto equals outer, derm equals skin. So mesoderm then, if we follow suit, give you a few seconds to work that one out. Meso equals middle. Again, derm equals skin. Therefore, endoderm would be endo equals inner and derm equals skin. Okay. What are the four types of body tissue, the four primary categories of tissue in the body? Epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve. In what four ways do epithelial tissue act as barriers between the body and surroundings? They protect the body from physical damage, control which substances enter and leave. They provide sensory information, and they all secrete various substances. What happens to cells during normal embryonic development? The cells will divide, move to new locations, differentiate, and migrate to new locations. How are epithelia classified? According to the number of cells and the shape of the cell. What is the difference between an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland? Exocrine gland will secrete its product into the tissue's interstitial space, where an exocrine gland will secrete the product to the outside world. What is the difference between tensile strength and compressive strength? Tensile strength is the ability to withstand a pulling force. Compressive strength is the ability to withstand compression. Now for this question, I'm going to stop the slide here. I'm going to stop my recording with this question, and I want you to answer this in the discussion board. I will make a discussion board post regarding this, and this will be worth points. What are the four major classes of connective tissue? Okay, guys, have a great week and we'll talk to you soon.